Late at night, an officer pulled over a lone woman in an empty parking lot. He grabbed her, and began a search, right in the parking lot. But he didn't know who he touched. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The night was quiet, unusually so, for a Thursday, in the outskirts of Los Angeles. Street lights buzzed softly, casting long amber streaks across cracked sidewalks and the occasional parked car. The hum of the distant traffic had softened to a lullaby. And the pharmacy parking lot on the corner of East Hanley and Merrow stood nearly empty. Save for a single black SUV, parked under the flickering neon sign. Rhonda Rousey sat behind the wheel of her vehicle. Her hand still gripping the steering wheel, even after she'd cut the engine. Sweat clung to the back of her neck. Her chest rose and fell slowly, as she focused on slowing her breathing. Training had gone late, much later than she'd planned. But the gym was private and silent. Just the way she liked it. No cameras, no fans, no distractions. It was her escape from the obligations of public life. A sacred space where fists spoke louder than words. Tonight though, something in her gut felt unsettled. Not from the workout itself, but from the empty streets, the long shadows. The way silence could sometimes feel like a trap being baited. She grabbed her duffel bag from the passenger seat, zipped it shut, and stepped out into the warm evening air. Clad in a dark hoodie, joggers, and sneakers, she looked like any other fitness enthusiast going about her late-night routine. Her blonde hair was tied back tightly, damp with exertion. No makeup. No entourage. Just herself. Alone and unbothered. Or so she thought. As she locked her SUV and turned toward the entrance of the pharmacy. The steady crunch of tires over asphalt made her stop mid-step. A patrol car pulled slowly into the lot. Headlights glaring directly at her. The driver's silhouette became clearer as the vehicle stopped, parking at an angle that partially blocked the lot's only exit. From the car stepped Officer Derek Malls. Tall, broad-shouldered, and smug. His uniform looked freshly pressed. But his face bore the relaxed fatigue of someone who'd clocked too many hours without purpose. A night patrol with no action always made him restless. He carried himself with an aura of habitual entitlement. The kind that clung to men used to holding power without consequence. He closed the car door and approached her with slow, calculated steps. One hand resting on his utility belt. His flashlight remained off. He didn't need it. "Evening, miss," he said. His tone casual. But something in the way he dragged out the vowels made it feel like a challenge. "What brings you out so late?" Rhonda met his eyes, cautious but calm. "Just grabbing water." "Mind telling me why you're parked here after hours?" he asked, feigning concern. As he looked past her at the pharmacy, whose lights were still on. "This lot's had some trouble lately. We've had reports of loitering. Break-ins. You fit the description." She raised an eyebrow. Already sensing where this was heading. "I just finished training. Needed something to rehydrate." "I'm not loitering, officer." "You got ID on you?" "In the car." "Let's get it then." Slowly, she turned back toward the SUV, fishing for her keys in her hoodie pocket. He followed behind her. A little too close. His boots echoing on the asphalt. When she opened the driver's side door and reached inside. His hand landed on her back, just between her shoulders. Not aggressive, but intrusive. She froze. "You sure you're not hiding something in that bag?" he asked. His voice a little lower now. "It's a big bag for just a water run." "I'm not hiding anything," she replied flatly, not moving. "And I don't appreciate being touched." He chuckled. Stepping closer. "Come on now, it's standard procedure. We've got rules to follow." His fingers brushed down her arm, slow and deliberate. Before he reached toward the bag slung over her shoulder. Rhonda stepped forward and turned to face him fully. Eyes locked. Voice firmer. Back off. His smile faltered. Then returned with a mocking twist. What's the matter? Don't like a little attention? She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes shifted from passive tolerance to measured calculation. Turn around, he ordered, placing his hand on his holster. Need to check you for weapons. Raise your arms. This is harassment, she said. This is me doing my job, he snapped. And if you don't want this to get worse, you'll cooperate. He grabbed her by the wrist. Not roughly. But with the authority of someone who thought he was untouchable. The moment his fingers tightened, she felt the decision crystallize in her chest. In a blur of movement, she twisted her arm free, dropped her weight, and stepped to the side. Using his own momentum to send him off balance. His foot slipped slightly. Enough for her to pivot behind him, pressing a palm to his shoulder blade to keep him at bay. Whoa, whoa, he said, laughing in disbelief. You're resisting now. Don't touch me again, she said, her voice like ice. But he wasn't laughing anymore. You're under arrest, he growled, reaching for his cuffs. You just assaulted an officer. She took a step back, raising both hands. No. You touched me inappropriately. You tried to coerce me. I defended myself. He lunged, this time with intent. She sidestepped and let his weight carry him forward, before sweeping his legs. He hit the ground hard, landing on his side. His radio skittered across the pavement. His hand went to his belt for the baton. But before he could draw it, she knelt beside him, pushing his arm to the ground, using the angle of his shoulder to keep him pinned. The silence was broken only by the sound of his breath, now shallow and furious. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, he spat. You're going to jail. I'm going to make sure they throw the book at you. I'm not the one who should be afraid, she said. Then stood, backing away with her hands up, giving him space to recover. But you should be. His hand fumbled for his radio. And his voice crackled through the air. Desperate and theatrical. Officer down. Suspect is violent, non-compliant, need backup. Within minutes, 2 more cruisers pulled into the lot. Sirens silent, but lights flashing. Doors flew open, and officers approached with drawn weapons. Freeze. Hands in the air. Rhonda complied. Slowly raising her hands. Her gaze steady. She attacked me. Maul shouted. Still on the ground, but now upright enough to gesture toward her. Tried to take my weapon. She's dangerous. I didn't try to take anything, she said. But her words were swallowed by the chaos. One of the arriving officers cuffed her without question. Pressing her cheek to the hood of her own SUV. Her hoodie was pulled tight across her shoulders. And she felt the cold metal of the cuffs lock into place. Sir, do you need medical? I'm fine, Malls growled. Get her in the car. In the distance, a phone camera glowed behind a bush. A teenager, no more than 17, zoomed in on the scene, whispering into his mic. Bro, that's Rhonda Rousey. And they're arresting her. She was led to the back of a cruiser. Silent now. Her jaw clenched. The humiliation stung. But it wasn't new. What was new was the scale of what this man had just triggered. Because he didn't know her. He didn't recognize her. And he didn't realize he had just grabbed the wrong woman. She sat in the back of the patrol car. Watching Officer Malls stand, brush himself off, and bark more orders. He thought this was the end of something. He didn't know. It was the beginning. The hum of the cruiser's engine was constant. A dull background vibration that did nothing to calm Rhonda's mind. As she sat handcuffed in the back seat. The padded plastic was sticky against her skin. And though her wrist no longer stung, the memory of Officer Mall's hand on her body burned far hotter. Her jaw was tight. Shoulders squared. She didn't squirm. Didn't protest. Didn't beg. She just waited. She had learned long ago that silence could be sharper than fury. And far more enduring. Outside, the parking lot was now a theater of activity. Flashing red and blue lights danced across nearby storefronts. Voices crackled through radios with code words and clipped urgency. Officer Malls stood at the center of it all, wrapping his arm in a makeshift sling. Half for dramatics, half for pain. His story spilled easily. Rehearsed. Exaggerated. A violent woman attacked him. Tried to wrestle his baton away. Aggressive, erratic behavior. He was a victim of an unprovoked assault. She snapped, he said to the younger officer jotting notes on a clipboard. Didn't even see it coming. 1 second she's compliant, next she's throwing elbows like some street fighter. He left out the groping. He left out the threats. He certainly left out the moment he offered to let her go. If she'd smile and play nice. But the narrative sounded good enough. And in the eyes of the responding officers, Malls had a uniform and a badge. She was just a suspect. As the cruiser pulled away from the pharmacy lot, Rhonda turned her head to watch the scene disappear behind her. A flicker of motion caught her eye. A glowing screen. Someone had been filming. A teenager, hunched behind a dumpster. Phone clutched tight. Eyes wide. He hadn't moved. Hadn't shouted or interfered. But he had captured something. It was a fragile glimmer of hope. One she tucked away deep in the back of her mind. The ride to the station was brief. But heavy. Neither officer in the front spoke to her. No Miranda rights. No clarification of charges. Just stone-faced silence. When they arrived at the precinct, she was processed with mechanical efficiency. Fingerprints. Mug shot. Personal belongings, bagged and tagged. Her phone, confiscated before she could attempt a single call. When she asked to contact her attorney, the booking sergeant responded with a lazy shrug and a muttered. Later. She was placed in a holding cell. With stark fluorescent lighting. And a metal bench bolted to the wall. The air was stale. Recycled. Thick with the sour smell of sweat and bleach. The walls, painted in a sickly shade of beige, closed in around her like a coffin. That hadn't been nailed shut, yet. Hours passed. No explanations. No visitors. No phone call. Only silence. In that silence, Rhonda reflected. Not with regret. But with focus. Every moment played back in her mind with surgical precision. Every word he said. Every place he touched. Every calculated glance. She wasn't confused. She wasn't rattled. She was angry. But more than that. She was ready. Officer Malls had made one critical mistake. He assumed power meant protection. He assumed silence would follow shame. He assumed she'd break. But Rhonda Rousey doesn't break. She trains to endure. She trains to outlast. And if necessary, she trains to make sure those who abuse power never forget the consequences. It was well past dawn when she was finally brought into an interview room. A single table. 2 chairs. And a camera mounted in the corner, blinking red. The detective who entered looked tired. His collar stained with coffee and stress. He sat across from her and opened a manila folder with deliberate calm. "You know why you're here." "I defended myself," she said. "From a predator in uniform." The detective didn't look up. "That's not what the report says." I don't care what the report says. He touched me. Threatened me. Suggested I cooperate in exchange for leniency. He sighed. Scratched something onto a pad. Look. We don't have time for theatrics. You're being charged with assault on a police officer. Resisting arrest. And attempted disarmament. That's a minimum of 3 felony charges. And none of those charges address what he did. He flipped through a few pages. Then leaned forward. I'm going to give you an opportunity here. You can agree to plead to a lesser charge, battery maybe. Walk with probation. No jail time. Or we can go to court and see how well a jury takes to someone with your history putting a cop in a sling. Rhonda tilted her head. You really don't know who I am, do you? I know your name, he said, finally glancing at the folder. Rhonda Jean Rousey. Mixed martial arts. Some movies. That doesn't mean you're above the law. No, she replied. But it means I know how to take a punch. And I know how to land one. The detective leaned back. Visibly irritated. You think the public's going to side with you? When they see what you did to a police officer? If they see all of it, she said. I think they'll understand perfectly. Unbeknownst to either of them. That understanding was already forming. In a modest apartment, a few blocks from the pharmacy lot. A 17-year-old named Malik sat hunched over his desk. Staring at the video he had captured on his phone. He had watched it a dozen times already. The way the officer's hand lingered too long. The way Rhonda warned him. The way she defended herself. Only after being grabbed. The sudden arrest. The panic in her voice. He hadn't planned to film anything that night. He was just skateboarding near the lot. Killing time. When the lights caught his attention. At first, he thought it was routine. Then he saw the woman flinch. He started recording on instinct. Now, the footage sat in his hands. And he knew exactly what he had to do. He posted the clip on TikTok first. With the caption. Cop harasses woman. Didn't realize she's Rhonda Rousey. Within 15 minutes. The video had over 2,000 views. Then 5. Then 20. Then, the comments section exploded. Wait, that's her. She handled that like a queen. Arrested for self-defense. Sounds about white. Tag Joe Rogan. Tag ESPN. Tag everybody. Within an hour, the video was circulating Twitter and Instagram. A popular MMA fan account reposted it with the caption. Rhonda Rousey got arrested for stopping an assault by a cop. Share until it burns the system. The internet had found its match. Back at the precinct. A low buzz began to build. Phones rang more often. Dispatchers exchanged nervous glances. A shift supervisor approached the holding area. With a printout from Twitter. Face pale. Inside her cell. Rhonda had no idea the storm was coming. But she felt it. Not fear. Momentum. Later that afternoon. After several more hours without formal questioning. Or access to counsel. A familiar voice echoed down the hallway. Rhonda. She turned her head. As her longtime manager Karen appeared. Flanked by 2 attorneys and a civilian oversight liaison. Behind them, a captain trailed reluctantly. Face red, and eyes narrowed. Stand up, one of the attorneys said. You're being released. For now. Rhonda stood slowly. Her eyes never leaving the captain's. He didn't speak. Didn't apologize. Just signed a form with a clenched jaw, and stepped aside. In the lobby, the noise hit like a wall. Reporters shouted questions. Flashbulbs popped. Cameramen jostled for space. She paused only briefly. standing beneath the precinct's shield emblem. "I didn't resist," she said clearly. "I didn't attack. I defended myself from a man who used his badge to violate my body. And I'm not going to stop until people like him are held accountable." The moment was recorded. It went viral that night. As Rhonda sat in a private office with her legal team, reviewing the next steps, a journalist from a major outlet sent her a message. "We've received 6 anonymous tips about Officer Malls. Women claiming he did the same to them. They were too afraid to speak before." Rhonda closed her eyes and exhaled. Not in relief, but in readiness. Because this wasn't about a bruised arm or handcuffs. It was about every woman who had ever been told to be quiet, to comply, to not make a scene. And Officer Malls had just made a scene, large enough for the entire world to see. The air inside the legal conference room was dense with tension and the low hum of electronics. Phones buzzed intermittently on silent. Screens glowed with messages that kept coming. News clips replayed themselves across multiple tabs on laptops. Rhonda sat at the head of the long mahogany table. Her arms crossed over her chest. Eyes trained on the monitor in front of her. Karen was beside her. Her face a mask of controlled fury. While the lead attorney, Amanda Tellis, clicked through a growing folder of witness statements, video transcriptions, and departmental policy documents. Everyone in the room moved with purpose. But Rhonda sat unnervingly still. They had all seen the video a dozen times. Malls touching her, violating her space, ignoring her words. The arrest. The look in his eyes. When he realized he couldn't control her. What had been meant to humiliate her had instead become evidence. But the weight of the moment hadn't lifted. If anything, it had intensified. There were no apologies from the department. No retraction of the charges. No internal investigation. At least, not one anyone admitted existed. The official line remained unchanged. Rhonda Rousey had assaulted a police officer and resisted arrest. The department would review all evidence. But for now, she was out on bail. And under formal accusation. A felony. 3 actually. Her trial date was pending. It should have broken her. It would have broken most. Instead, Rhonda's resolve solidified. She had been through worse. Though never like this. Not in a context so poisoned with power and ego. She had fought in cages. In rings. On movie sets. Through media storms and private heartbreaks. But this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the system. About what happened in silence. About what happened in shadows. Amanda clicked the next file open. And turned the monitor toward Rhonda. It was an anonymous tip. Another woman. No name. No date. Just a description. Officer M touched me during a stop. Said if I told anyone, he'd say I attacked him. I was 16. I kept quiet. I thought it was just me. Rhonda's stomach turned. Not from surprise. From confirmation. The sickness of knowing it wasn't an isolated incident. Of knowing how many had carried the shame without a platform. Without proof. Without the right to be believed. And how many others, like Malls, wore uniforms and smirks and authority. And left a trail of silent scars. By evening, the story had outgrown its original container. It wasn't just about Rhonda anymore. The video had sparked a national conversation. Hashtags evolved from Hashtag Free Rhonda to Hashtag She Fought Back to Hashtag Cuff the Cop. And more recently, Hashtag No Badge for Predators. Celebrities spoke out. Female athletes. Actors. Journalists. Even former officers. Talk show panels debated the broader implications. News anchors used words like systemic failure, culture of impunity, and misogynistic policing. But the silence inside the department persisted. It was the next morning when Rhonda received a call from a blocked number. She almost didn't answer. But something in her told her to pick up. "Miss Rousey." The voice on the other end said. Low. Calm. "I used to work internal. I can't say more over the phone. But you're not wrong. He's done this before. More than once. The records, some are buried. But they exist." Before she could speak, the call disconnected. Amanda traced the call's origin. A scrambled node. Untraceable. Whoever it was. They knew how to protect themselves. Which meant they'd seen firsthand what happened to people who didn't. That same day, a reporter from the Herald Tribune reached out to Amanda. Her name was Selena Page. 10 years of investigative journalism. A specialty in misconduct and government corruption. She had sources. And she'd been chasing Officer Derek Malls for over 2 years. "I was told to drop the story," Selena said. In their meeting later that afternoon. Seated across from Rhonda in a quiet, private cafe just off Sunset. "My editor. My managing director. Said it was not actionable. Not in the public interest. Too speculative. But I knew. I had testimonies. I had fragments. But what I didn't have was a face. A voice the public would rally behind. Then, they arrested you." She reached into her bag. And pulled out a thin manila folder. Inside were copies of complaints. Handwritten notes from women. Who had submitted formal grievances to the precinct. Several had been retracted. One was missing entirely from the public complaint log. The language was eerily similar. "Officer touched me inappropriately during pat-down. Made suggestive comments. Threatened to charge me if I didn't comply." Some were as old as 7 years. One involved a minor. None had resulted in disciplinary action. "They're calling it inconclusive," Selena continued. "But I know what that means. It means they looked the other way. Or worse. They helped cover it." Rhonda's fingers brushed lightly across the pages. Careful not to smudge the ink. "Why come forward now?" "Because you won't stay silent," the journalist said. "And that makes it safe for others not to." By the end of the week, 5 women had stepped forward publicly. 3 used their real names. 2 spoke through attorneys. Their stories echoed with terrifying similarity. Nighttime traffic stops. Suggestive comments. Inappropriate touching. Threats of arrest. And the same face staring back from under the brim of a patrol cap. Officer Malls. Still, the department denied knowledge of a pattern. An internal spokesperson issued a statement saying, the officer in question maintained an otherwise exemplary record. And that all allegations would be handled according to departmental protocols. A slap in the face. A reminder of how deeply the rot was buried. But it wasn't just the police under pressure now. The district attorney's office, caught in the maelstrom of public outrage, released a vague acknowledgement of a pending review. Protesters gathered outside the precinct. Not hundreds, thousands. Women. Men. Mothers with children. Survivors holding signs that read, I believe her. You can't arrest the truth. Rhonda stood among them one night. Hood pulled over her head. Blending in. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. The cameras captured her anyway, That same evening, someone painted over the wall outside the precinct. No badge above consent. In red. By now, Rhonda's legal team had drafted a formal countersuit against Officer Malls and the department for false arrest, excessive force, sexual harassment, and violation of civil rights. But more than compensation, she wanted exposure. She wanted the public to see what had been hidden for so long. And then, the tipping point came. Malik, the teenager who had filmed the original video, had been quiet. He'd stayed out of the spotlight, overwhelmed by the attention his clip had generated. But after days of silence, he requested to speak. He appeared on a major news show with his mother by his side. Nervous, trembling, but resolute. "I wasn't supposed to be there," he said. "But I saw it." He touched her. She told him to stop. Then he grabbed her. She didn't attack. She defended herself. He was the one that went too far. And I knew if I didn't share it, no one would believe her. His voice cracked on the last words. His mother held his hand. The room was silent. The clip went viral, again. Hashtags surged. Politicians weighed in. Federal civil rights advocates called for an independent investigation. And finally, the pressure broke through. Officer Malls was placed on administrative leave, pending a formal review. A meaningless phrase, but a crack in the wall, nonetheless. For Rhonda, it wasn't enough. She held a press conference the next day, surrounded by her team, and several of the women who had come forward. "This isn't about me," she said into the sea of microphones. "This is about a system that grooms predators in uniform, and punishes the people who fight back. They thought arresting me would silence me. They were wrong. And they're going to learn what happens when they try to bury the truth under a badge." She left the stage to thunderous applause. And somewhere behind locked office doors and shuttered windows, men in suits and uniforms realized the same thing. Officer Malls had learned too late. They had picked the wrong woman to touch. And now, there would be no more silence. The sun rose over Los Angeles like a blade, being drawn slowly across the skyline, slicing the night into ribbons of fire and smoke. From the roof of the downtown hotel where Rhonda had been staying, under the advice of her legal team, she could see the distant shimmer of morning light, bleeding through a haze of pollution and tension. Below her, the city was waking into a frenzy. News vans clogged intersections. Protest banners hung over overpasses. And clusters of civilians were already gathering in front of the Santa Monica Police Department, their chants growing louder each day. What had begun as an arrest had evolved into something seismic. Rhonda watched it unfold with a kind of numb clarity. Her name was everywhere now. Not just on MMA forums or in celebrity gossip threads, but in congressional speeches, in UN subcommittee reports, in classrooms and courtrooms, and corporate training videos. For some, she had become a symbol of resistance. For others, a threat. But for herself, she felt like a pressure valve, left to boil, waiting for a final release. In the days following her press conference, the city became a storm of consequence. The department remained silent, but its walls shook. More women came forward. 8. Then 11. Then over 20. The official hotline for internal affairs had to be redirected through 3 operators. Every day brought another voice, another buried file, another missing report. And somewhere in that pile of paper and silence, something else began to surface. It started with a slip. A former officer, retired early for personal reasons, contacted Amanda's office under conditions of anonymity. He didn't want to be recorded. He didn't want to give his name. But he told them to look deeper. He said the problem wasn't just malls. It wasn't even just the department. It was a network. A quiet fraternity buried inside the structure. Protected by decades of complicity. They had a name once. Blue Shield. Amanda cross-checked what little they had. Against public records. No official references. No documentation. Nothing in budgets or rosters. But buried in an old civil suit from a rural California town. A group of plaintiffs had accused several officers of racially motivated abuse. The case had never gone to trial. Settled out of court. The officers reassigned. Among the scanned court documents was a single footnote. Unit designation disbanded, Blue Shield South. Rhonda leaned over the screen when Amanda showed it to her. The words were like a bruise rising to the surface. Her first instinct was disbelief. The second, recognition. This wasn't just about abuse. This was about a culture. Amanda found a blurry group photo from the lawsuit's archive. A dozen officers. Arms folded. Most of them grinning. And there, third from the right. Unmistakable, even in grainy shadow. Stood Officer Derek Malls. They had a system. They had moved him. Reassigned him. Protected him. And it wasn't over. That afternoon, a team of volunteers under Amanda's supervision began combing through personnel transfers. From the counties listed in the original case, patterns began to emerge. Officers who shared precincts. Overlapping traffic stop data. Redacted memos. Disciplinary complaints that vanished between jurisdictions. The deeper they looked, the more the pieces aligned. Like puzzle fragments held together by omission. At the same time, Selena Page published the first part of her long-delayed exposé. She called it "The Shield That Silences." The article traced decades of misconduct, tied to a hidden structure within California's law enforcement apparatus. She detailed instances of false charges, sexual misconduct, and intimidation tactics designed to keep victims quiet. It was meticulous. Journalistic war. She quoted anonymous sources, filed FOIA requests, and traced sealed settlements. It was damning. And it was just the beginning. The public reaction was instant. And violent. City officials scrambled. The mayor issued a brief statement calling for calm. Civil rights leaders held vigils outside the courthouse. But the online world didn't wait for permission. Social media erupted. Hashtags multiplied. TikTok became a cascade of survivor testimonials. Anonymous videos. Faces blurred and voices modulated. Began to fill feeds. He touched me. He threatened me. They told me to stay quiet. And somewhere within that chaos, Malls vanished. He failed to report to his scheduled check-ins. His department-issued weapon was missing. His house was found empty. Furniture overturned. Surveillance hard drives, gone. No forwarding address. No communication. His legal team issued a vague statement about voluntary isolation. But no one believed them. Not anymore. Amanda feared he would run. Rhonda disagreed. He's not running, she said. He's hiding. That's different. Selena received a package the next day. No return address. Inside was a flash drive labeled BSS 2015 Archive. It contained internal emails, rosters, and most disturbingly, video. Body cam footage never released. Recordings of trainings where officers joked about manipulating suspects. Using force in areas without cameras. Planting doubt into female victim statements. In one clip, Malls was present, laughing. In another, he instructed a rookie officer on how to assert dominance during frisking. It was a blueprint for systemic abuse. Selena contacted Amanda immediately. They made copies. Rhonda watched every frame without blinking. Her knuckles turned white as the laughter echoed through the speakers. "We need to release this," she said. Voice like steel. Amanda hesitated. "It's sensitive. If this goes out unredacted, it could tank the whole legal process." "It's not about the process," Rhonda said. "It's about truth. I used silence as a weapon. Let's use their words as a blade." That evening, Rhonda sat in front of a camera in a dimly lit studio. No makeup. No podium. No script. Just her. And the truth. She spoke plainly. "This isn't about me," she said. "It's about every woman who said no. And got punished for it. About every officer who thinks the badge means untouchable. It's about systems that protect predators. And punish survivors. I'm not here to be your hero. I'm here to make sure this never happens again." The video went live at 8 p.m. By midnight, it had 10 million views. The next morning, the Santa Monica Police Department was locked down. Protesters surrounded the perimeter. A whistleblower leaked an email exchange between upper-level officials discussing how best to contain the fallout. Contain. Not investigate. Not address. Contain. And then came the bombshell. An internal affairs officer named Julianne Shaw held a press conference outside her department. With shaken hands and watery eyes, she confirmed what Selena and Amanda had uncovered. "There is a pattern of intentional suppression. Of misconduct within our department," she said. "Files have been deleted. Officers reassigned. Victims intimidated. I can no longer remain silent." Behind her, a banner hung from the steps. "Protect the public, not the badge." Rhonda watched it live on a screen in her hotel room. The city outside was a furnace now. And she felt the heat in her veins. But the heat wasn't fear. It was momentum. That night, a knock came at her door. When she opened it, a young woman in plain clothes stood there, holding an envelope. No badge. No introduction. She handed Rhonda the envelope and disappeared down the hallway before a single question could be asked. Inside was a single photo. Malls, in a dimly lit room. Seated across from another man. Face turned away. A timestamp, last week. A handwritten note beneath. Still working with the others. Still moving. He's not done. Rhonda folded the photo slowly. "They're still protecting each other," she said aloud. Amanda looked at her from the couch. "Then we exposed them all." The fire had already started. And it wasn't going out. The photo still lay on the table. When the morning light broke through the hotel room window, casting thin golden lines across its surface, Malls sat captured in static grain. Frozen mid-conversation. With a man whose face remained turned from the camera's view. The timestamp was unmistakable. He hadn't run. He hadn't disappeared. He had simply retreated. Deeper into the same web that had protected him for years. The network was not a memory. It was alive. Watching. Adapting. Hiding in plain sight. Rhonda stared at the image for the third time that morning. She had hardly slept. Her thoughts churning through the night. In sync with the flashing red notifications pouring into her phone. Messages from survivors. Reporters. Allies. Strangers. Some were angry. Some grateful. Some terrified. But all of them were awake now. That was the shift. That was the line that had been crossed. The country was no longer asking whether abuse had occurred. They were asking how many had helped cover it up. Amanda entered the room. Her blazer already creased from the early hours of movement. Her laptop under her arm. Eyes burning with caffeine-fueled resolve. She said nothing at first. Just dropped a printout onto the table next to the photo. A screenshot. An anonymous email, routed through encrypted servers. Its subject line stark. City Hall has files. Blue Shield buried them here. They're panicking, Amanda said. Sliding into the chair across from her. They're wiping clean everything they can reach. But they're sloppy now. And someone inside wants it to stop. Rhonda picked up the page and read the text again. It was sparse. But precise. Mentions of names she recognized. Not just malls. But officers she had never met. People who had moved departments. Counties. Even entire states. To avoid scrutiny. Several were listed as consultants. One, shockingly, was training cadets at a private academy. Another, Ethan Briggs, had been flagged in an early internal review. Then quietly promoted to a senior field position in Los Angeles. Just a year ago. Her pulse rose. Briggs, she said slowly. That was the man in the photo. Amanda nodded. We pulled his file this morning. Records are clean. But too clean. Sanitized. Nothing older than 5 years. That's not standard. Someone purged it. Rhonda exhaled through her nose. The pieces were shifting. Reconfiguring. Malls hadn't been working alone. He never was. He was a frontman. A symptom. The disease had always run deeper. Blue Shield wasn't dismantled. It had just changed uniforms. The decision came swiftly. Amanda initiated contact with the Federal Task Force liaison, who had reached out after Selena's article detonated. Within hours, Rhonda and her team were escorted to a secure federal office downtown. It was the first time she saw the sheer scale of the investigation unfolding beyond her own case. Pin boards lined the walls, covered in mug shots, maps, timelines. At the center, Blue Shield South. Mall's face marked in red. And beside him, newly added, Ethan Briggs. The lead federal agent, Marcus Trell, greeted them without preamble. He was lean. Quiet. But his presence filled the room with gravity. We've been tracking fragments of this group for nearly a decade, he said, gesturing to the board. They were supposed to be disbanded after Internal Affairs flagged them in 2015. But the disbanding was a formality. They scattered. Some retired. Others changed badges. Some went private. But the structure remained intact. Purposeful. He clicked a remote. And a surveillance photo appeared on the monitor. Briggs. Entering a restricted archive building under a false name. 3 days ago. A city records facility. He's tying up loose ends, Trell said. Which means we're close. Rhonda folded her arms. Then bait him. They didn't hesitate. That afternoon, Amanda crafted a decoy email, routed through a known intermediary channel used by former officers. It referenced potential leaks, backup drives, and whistleblowers. They knew it would be intercepted. That was the point. Briggs took the bait. 2 hours later. Security footage caught him entering the City Hall basement archives. Dressed in maintenance coveralls. A fake badge clipped to his pocket. He stayed inside for 28 minutes. When federal agents moved in, he was gone. But he had left something behind. On a steel folding chair. In the empty records room. Was a photo. Rhonda. Amanda. Selena. Each of their faces marked with a red slash. It wasn't just a cover-up anymore. It was a hunt. That night, security around Rhonda's hotel increased threefold. Her assistant Karen was relocated to a secure address. But the feeling of exposure, of being tracked, never left. Every knock at the door. Every glance from across the street. The paranoia wasn't unwarranted. Because they were being watched. Just past midnight. A citywide alert went out. Unauthorized surveillance device found on a civilian vehicle. A GPS tracker. It had been wired to transmit data in real time. Its signal routed through multiple nodes. Before terminating at a local network. Registered to a dummy security firm. One tied to a former Blue Shield officer. Rhonda stood outside the lot where the device had been found. Staring down at the blinking unit, now deactivated in an evidence bag. She said nothing. But the message was clear. They weren't just watching her movements. They were planning something more. The next morning, a man stepped forward. His name was Officer Raymond Cho. He had served with Malls 5 years earlier. And had left quietly after raising concerns to a superior. Concerns that were ignored. Now. He wanted to speak. But not publicly. I have a family, he told Rhonda and Amanda during their off-record meeting. If they come after me, I won't see them again. But you need to know. They kept backups. Malls, Briggs, a few others. Flash drives. Recordings. Some from body cams that were never submitted. They laughed about it. Like trophies. Cho handed them a small case. Inside. A flash drive with a single label. Doctrine. What played out on the screen was worse than they imagined. Training seminars. Recorded in private rooms. Officers discussing methods to avoid IIA detection. Protocols for manipulating body cam footage. Psychological tactics for breaking down resistant detainees. Scripts for press statements. A mock exercise in containing victims. That included sexually explicit roleplay. Laughter. And slurs. One clip showed Malls and Briggs watching dash cam footage of a female suspect being forced to the ground. They joked about her screams. Rhonda watched it all in silence. Her jaw locked. Her hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't speak until the video ended. Release it, she said. Amanda hesitated. If we do this without redactions, then they see exactly who we're dealing with. The footage went online that evening. Under the headline. Inside the Blue Shield Doctrine, a culture of control. It spread faster than the first video ever had. News networks interrupted programming. Public figures issued statements. Federal prosecutors opened new investigations. And on the steps of City Hall, citizens gathered by the thousands. Rhonda arrived in silence. Stepping up to the microphone, alone. The crowd waited. They built a system to silence us, she said. They trained each other to abuse. To manipulate. To destroy lives. Not because they had to. But because they knew they could get away with it. I've fought in cages. I've taken punches that would stop a heart. But nothing hit harder than their silence. She paused. Looked out over the crowd. Thousands of faces. Women. Men. Children. Survivors. I'm not afraid of their network. I'm not afraid of their threats. I'm afraid of what happens if we stop looking. If we go back to pretending this isn't the truth. But we won't. Not now. Not ever again. The crowd roared. The next day, the Department of Justice announced indictments against 23 officers tied to Blue Shield South. Charges included conspiracy, obstruction of justice, sexual misconduct under color of law, and destruction of evidence. Malls was still at large. Briggs, too. But they were no longer in control. One by one, the systems they relied on collapsed. Officers turned on each other. Files emerged from old safes. Witnesses came forward. From retirement homes. From shelters. From shadows. The truth could no longer be hidden. And as Rhonda stood on the balcony of the hotel that night, watching the city lights shimmer with electricity and change, she finally let herself exhale. She hadn't set out to start a revolution. But when it came for her, she had chosen to stand. And the silence that had once felt like a weapon was now broken beyond repair. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch the next video.